next thing we're going to talk about is worms, otherwise known as helminths. That's their official title. What a lovely thought, right? We start talking about anthelminthics on page 90, and the book just covers it briefly, so I'm going to cover it briefly too. The table on page 89 does talk about one anthelminthic, but there are quite a few of them if somebody is unfortunate enough to end up with intestinal helminths. Helminthiasis refers to an infestation by worms, and these are the common ones: pin, round, hook, tape, and whip. And the ones that really cause the problems around the world are roundworms, hookworms, and whipworms. And I used to have a great video that I showed my class about worm infestations in the rest of the world, and unfortunately that stopped working. But it was a great video about what certain groups are trying to do to help with the problems caused by helminthiasis in 1/3 of the world's population. Gonna do some really thrilling pictures here. So there's hookworms, and most of these will attach somehow to the inside of the GI tract, and these have little hooks on them. They also are transmitted through the skin in the bottoms of the feet. They live in the soil, and as people walk around, the larva attaches to the bottoms of their feet, works its way into the capillaries, and eventually makes its way into the GI tract. Hookworm used to be an endemic problem all over the world. In fact, the American South had a terrible problem with hookworm because it stays warm. Stays warm a good part of the year. The hookworm larva in the soil is not killed, and a lot of people were going barefoot. Whipworm. I mean, look at that thing. Chew. Imagine that living in your gut, eating up your food. Tapeworms, they get really long. Pinworms. Now, pinworms, of all these worms, pinworms are probably the most commonly found in America because little kids tend to get them. They're very tiny, they're easily transmitted. They make kids itch really bad, and you know, little kids, they're nasty, they scratch, they don't care. They scratch, they put their fingers in their mouths, they touch toys, and it's easily transmittable. So it can be very common for children, especially in like nursery schools, daycare centers, for there to be a breakout of pinworms. And then roundworms. And this particular picture is really, I mentioned Monsters Inside Me, and this is a shot from that show where somebody found a roundworm living in their eyeball. So, you know, no matter how stressed we feel right now with everything that's going on, most of us do not have roundworms in our eyeballs. So that's one good thing we can say. The drugs for intestinal worms, there are many of them. The one that's covered in our book is praziquantel or biltricide. That's our prototype drug because we talk about it here in our textbook. But they paralyze the parasite, they kill it, and then they make it stop hanging on to the host site so that it can be excreted. And it's not so common to see worms in humans here in the United States, but any of you who've ever bought a puppy, or I shouldn't say bought, adopted a puppy, puppies are wormy little things. And one of the first things they do when you take them to the vet is they give them a anthelminthic, a drug for worms, and then you see them excreted. And pretty nasty. And that happens with humans too. These are the names of some other anthelminthics you might see: thiabendazole, ivermectin, pyrantel. Pyrantel is sometimes given for pinworms. And then these other ones that are listed, but praziquantel is the one that's discussed in your book, so we'll use that as our prototype drug for this chapter. Adverse reactions are mostly going to be GI in origin, but there are some drug-specific anthelminthic adverse effects covered on page 90. Many times people, as the larva of the worm dies inside their body, they'll give off enzymes that make people allergic. And so they'll have an allergic reaction, not to the drug itself, but to the larva stage of the worm. So the healthcare provider just needs to be contacted in the event of some kind of allergic reaction in anyone who's taken anti-worm medication. Drug interactions are very specific depending on the drug. Education needs to be done. Sit down, figure out what the patient's taking, and compare it to what the product package insert says. For assessment, you want to do a complete health history, look at the symptoms that the patient has had. For diagnosis, we want to look at any of the other problems that would affect treatment in a patient. Lots of education, nursing diagnosis. And then usually nutritional considerations, because patients who have helminths, everything that they eat, the worms are getting a portion of that because of it being in the GI tract. So it's common to see nutritional deficiencies. In areas where malaria is endemic, it's recommended that malaria is treated first, and then treat all family members for the intestinal helminths. We want to educate our patient on preventing transmission of these worms, so very specific hygiene things. On patient teaching on page 90, we want to tell them to wash the toilet seat every day. They should wash and boil bedding once a week, and many times the helminths are spread by whoever is preparing food, so meticulous hand washing and cleaning under the fingernails will help prevent transmission. Because of these drugs, their skin and urine may have a strange odor that they're not used to, and we need to warn them about that. Hookworm, because they attach to the surface of the GI tract with their little hooks, there's going to be a GI bleed, a very slow, insidious GI bleed that doesn't show up right away, and anemia can result. Very dangerous to children, pregnant women. The anemia is a secondary problem to these worms. And of course, all these meds can cause GI side effects. Evaluation, how is the person responding, is done by stool specimen. And it'll take more than one stool specimen. And the specific drug ordered or lab test ordered that you'll see sometimes is O&P. They'll say stool for O&P, and that means ova and parasites. So they're looking for the parasite themselves, and they're looking for the eggs of the parasite. And when a person's on medication, repeated O&P can show how the person is responding. And this I just thought was kind of funny. Could you have a parasite? But like I said, in this day and age, we're very fortunate. We have treated water. We have very strict food regulations. And so it is very unusual for people in Western societies to have intestinal worms. All right, last thing we're going to talk about is malaria. So let me stop this particular stage of the video and then finish talking about that.